Hello there folks, my name is Spunks and welcome back to an episode of Box Office Chat. This is the show where I break down the top 5 domestic box office results, see where each movie landed, and see how well each movie did. So let's get started. Number 5 was Pushpa 2 The Rule, making $4.8 million this weekend, and since it opened on Thursday, it adds to a domestic total of $9 million and a worldwide total of $11 million. Another Indian movie making enough to crack the top 5, always a welcome surprise. I thought, despite the fact that I was aware this was actually coming out this weekend, I thought one of the other new wide releases, maybe the Demon Slayer movie or Y2K, was gonna crack the top 5, but no, it was this. Quite a surprise, as they always manage to do. And interestingly enough, despite this being a sequel, the first film actually did not release in America, as far as I know. People can correct me if I'm wrong, but to my knowledge, the first film was not released in America. So the fact that the second one not only got an American release, but was able to make enough to crack the top 5 is really impressive to see. It shows that people, were still able to watch the first film, and got really hyped up to see the second one. All around, as I've said with many of these Indian films that have cracked in the top 5, always a welcome surprise. Definitely another one that caught me by just surprise, even though I was actually aware this was coming out this time. But don't expect it to last long in the top 5. These movies tend to be very front loaded, so don't expect to see it very long here, but still rather very impressive, and always welcome to see one of these movies in the top 5. Number 4 was Red 1, making $7 million this weekend, adding to a domestic total of $85 million and a worldwide total of $164 million. Once again, out of all of the holdovers in the top 5, this was the movie to have the best hold out of any of them. Again, not Gladiator, not Wicked, not even Moana. This movie, the word of mouth is really starting to spread out here. It's definitely picking itself back up from its big second weekend drop. And from the looks of it, seeing as how we're slowly but surely approaching Christmas, it seems that it's very likely that this movie will surpass the $100 million milestone domestically, which I think is rather impressive considering, the poor critical reviews and the initial concerning reception for the film on its opening weekend, and especially that second weekend drop off. It looked like this movie was going to be another disaster, well, it still technically is. It is. It's definitely not making back its initial budget, but this is still rather definitely a better turnaround for this movie. And on the worldwide side of things, it should get to the $200 million milestone very soon, which I've said many times. I think that would be a win for this movie, even with it not being anywhere near the production budget. The fact that it would surpass such a milestone, despite all the competition and all, the backlash around the horrible production and just the movie in general, that would be really impressive, and it seems like it's gonna get there. So yeah, this movie could have ended up being a sleeper hit. It could have been the surprise of the holiday season if it wasn't for that budget. Had this been significantly cheap, had this been like if you remember that movie, had this movie had a similar budget to that, this story would have been much different. Many people would be talking a bit more about, oh, this movie's actually performing not that bad. But because of that $250 million budget, it's just coming up short. These numbers are just not going to salvage it. So it's in an interesting place, this movie. It's not doing as bad as I thought it would. It's very impressive, the staying power this movie has had, and I'm sure it's going to get a big Christmas boost. Again, this is the big Christmas movie of the season, but given that budget, it's still going to end up being one of the bigger disasters of the year, unfortunately. So even as it is turning itself around and making somewhat of a name for itself, it's still not in the green, unfortunately. We'll see how much further this movie can go. Again, Christmas is around the corner, and the legs are showing promise, but it's still not going to make enough to really, salvage that big price tag. Number 3 was Gladiator 2, making $12 million this weekend, adding to a domestic total of $132 million and a worldwide total of $368 million. So the movie took quite a hit. It was expected for many of the movies to take quite a hit this weekend. It is post-Thanksgiving weekend, so not as many people were as available to go check out a bunch of movies this weekend as they were last weekend, but still, this is still quite a big drop-off, falling nearly 60%. It just barely missed it with a 59% drop-off from last weekend. It could have been worse, but I think on top of, it being the weekend after Thanksgiving, I just also think, the word of mouth isn't really that strong. Again, like I said last weekend, out of the big three movies that came out around Thanksgiving, this was the one that was getting the least attention, minus a very admittedly funny, clever SNL sketch that dropped over this weekend. But compared to the other two, this movie just doesn't seem to have that, word of mouth, that level of buzz surrounding it, unfortunately, and it's causing it to fall short of what the other two have done recently. And I think it's even gonna fall short of matching the numbers of the first film. The first Gladiator made $187 million domestically and $451 million worldwide back in the year 2000. This year it's getting there. It's getting there, at least worldwide, thanks to a big boost internationally. It should get to 400 million by the end of this weekend, and I think it'll probably just barely get past the $450 million milestone worldwide, maybe, if it's very lucky and it's able to avoid the competition. But it seems like the international draw is much bigger than it is domestically. It should get to 150 million domestically very soon, but I don't think it's going to match the total of the first film. It just doesn't seem like many people are really going out to see it. Many people are really that interested. The word of mouth doesn't seem to be there with this movie, unfortunately. I could be wrong. Maybe this does turn itself around. Again, Red One was able to turn itself around, and that's doing worse than this movie is, so who knows, maybe it'll find its audience after this weekend, but I don't know. I think this is just going to end up being a slight disappointment. It's not as big of a disaster as Red One, but given, once again, the huge price tag, $250 million budget, it's going to be a bit of a disappointment. So yeah, not terrible, but also not great either. We'll see. We're just gonna have to wait and see how much further this movie can go at this point. I'm not sure if it's still got any steam left in the tank, but who knows? I've been wrong before. Yeah, otherwise, it's doing fine, I guess. Number 2 was Wicked, making $36 million this weekend, adding to a domestic total of $322 million and a worldwide total of $457 million. Now, this movie also faced a bit of a drop this weekend, but when you consider that this was the post-Thanksgiving weekend, not everybody was as available as they were the prior weekend, this drop-off actually isn't that bad. It only dropped 55%, which is definitely on the steeper side, but it's not catastrophist. It's not as big as, Gladiator 2 and another movie we'll get to in a moment. This movie still has a grasp on the movie-going audience. People still really want to go check this movie out, or are seeing it for the cajillionth time, or however. People are really digging this movie. The word of mouth has just been that strong, and because of that, it has officially surpassed the $300 million milestone domestically. I'm sure it'll get to 350 by the end of this weekend, and it seems to be picking up some steam internationally, not as much as domestically, but it's certainly not as disastrous or disappointing as Twisters did internationally back earlier this summer. And because of that, it has officially surpassed not just the $400 million milestone, but the $450 million milestone. It should get to $500 million worldwide once again by the end of this week. I just think, with the holidays around the corner and just the electric word of mouth, this movie has just become the movie to see. So much so that it's actually outpaced Moana 2 right now. In the days leading up to the weekend, it was topping it in the daily numbers, and it has made more money than that film has right now. We'll get to Moana 2 in a moment, but yeah, really impressive considering how, Moana just had the bigger start. Again, I know a lot of kids are at school and they can't see Moana 2 as much as they would when they were off, but still, this is rather very impressive and a good sign of things to come for this movie. The legs are very, very strong, and it's looking like it's going to continue to make that money leading up to the Christmas sing-along re-release, which I'm sure is going to give this movie a really big boost. All around, Wicked seems to be doing fine despite, the post-Thanksgiving blues. This movie's still doing really good. And finally, let's end the video off with the number 1 movie of the weekend, which was once again Moana 2, making $51 million this weekend, adding to a domestic total of $299 million and a worldwide total of $599 million. Let me just start by saying that this movie is still not doing bad at all. Far from it. It's just $1 million shy away from $300 million domestically and $600 million worldwide. The movie costing $150 million to make. It's doing really solid. It actually had the biggest post Thanksgiving weekend ever. This movie is doing A-OK. That being said, I think there is some cause for concern over this movie's performance. I do think, despite the fact that this had the biggest post-Thanksgiving weekend ever for a movie, I think that the fact that this movie dropped as much as it did is a sign of how people are responding to this movie. It fell 63% this weekend. I know a lot of people were expecting big drops, but even something like Wicked, which is also big family musical out, was able to get under 60%. So I think, it's not just the fact that, not as many families were as available to go see the movie this weekend, but I also think the word of mouth has maybe spread that the movie's just not that good. And especially considering with Wicked outpacing it right now, at least domestically, worldwide, this movie is just a juggernaut. This movie still is going to be a juggernaut, but I think it's probably going to fall short of the really high heights it's set for itself with its opening weekend, just because of how, lackluster it is, especially compared to the first film. This is the same year that we had Inside Out 2. That movie was just as good, if not better, than the first film, and that film reached heights no one saw for it. Granted, it was also released in the summer, but I digress. No one thought that movie was going to be the biggest movie of the year, and I'm sure with this movie's opening, many people thought this was going to be the biggest movie of the year, but I just don't think that's going to happen, unfortunately. If the movie was better, if the movie was good, I think we would have seen a much better drop-off for this movie, but as is, it's still going to make a lot of money. It's still going to do very well, especially with the holidays coming up, even if it gets beaten out by Wicked in quality and maybe even box office on the domestic side. At least this movie is still going to be fine. Disney doesn't really have anything to worry about, but considering how the word of mouth is definitely starting to spread with this movie, how it's just not as good as the original. I think that's going to be cause for concern, and it's definitely going to be the reason it doesn't reach the heights of some other big tentpole movies like Inside Out 2 did. But still, this movie's doing very well. It's nothing that Disney has to worry about, just a bit of a cause of concern regarding this movie set. Those were your top 5 domestic box office results for this weekend, but we're not quite done yet, as we've got another week ahead of us and new movies hitting theaters. And while this weekend there are 2 new wide releases, I'm not having a lot of high hopes for the new Lord of the Rings animated movie. It'll crack the top 5, but given the really minimal marketing and the severe lack of buzz I'm seeing for it, I just don't have a lot of faith in that movie. It'll crack the top 5, but it's not going to make a big splash, if you know what I mean. So let's move on to the other big wide release that I'm not even sure is going to make it that as much of a bigger splash than I think I'm projecting it will, which is Kraven the Hunter. Yes, folks, this movie is actually coming out. After being delayed numerous times, the film is finally being released just in time for the holidays. This is an interesting one. It's the final comic book movie of the year, and I think it's safe to say it's not going to make as much as Deadpool, and I'm not even sure if it's going to make as much as Venom: The Last Dance. I don't think it's going to bomb as hard as Joker or Madam Web, but I just don't have a lot of faith in this movie either. It'll do better than Lord of the Rings, but again, that's not saying much here. I think the marketing has been decent. I've been seeing some promos. I've certainly gotten the trailer a bunch of times. The buzz seems to be there slightly. I see some people talking about it, but there's a lot of other people that I know who just aren't interested in this movie or don't even know this is actually coming out, really. And I think this is more of a liability on Sony's part. I just don't think they really have a lot of faith in this movie despite it coming out for the holidays. I just think they just need to get this out. They just want to find a way to give it as much of a boost as they needed to with the holidays. It'll definitely stand out with the R rating. Maybe that'll help it out. And I think if there's anything salvaging this movie is that if it's at least decent, if it's okay, this doesn't even have to be that great. If it's a 5 out of 10 movie, maybe this movie becomes the big holiday surprise of the year. The fact that it doesn't even need to be that good shows you how low the bar is here for this movie. But if it's a 5 out of 10 movie, I think it'll do just. But given the cinematic universe this movie is a part of, again, the bar is very low, and I'm not expecting this movie to stand out from the rest of the crowd. So it's gonna be an interesting one to check. Gonna be interesting to see how this performs, especially during the holidays. But we'll see how well this movie truly does, as well as the rest of the movies that land in the top 5 on the next Box Office Chat. And that's going to do it for this week's episode of Box Office Chat. What did you all think of the results? Were you satisfied, unsatisfied? Comment down below and let me know. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you like this channel, hit the subscribe button. Follow me on all the social media links right there. And until next time, everyone, stay sharp.